Welcome in to the Hot Read podcast, not live here on Friday, May the 23rd. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at the 440 Sports Podcast Network. You can follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke, joined here on this Hot Read Happy Hour Friday for all of you. For us, it's earlier in the week as we both have vacation plans coming up here on the week, but still want to bring the content to you guys throughout this week with none other than my co-host Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of the Sobros Network, one half of Football and Other F Words, and co-writer of Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are you doing, my friend? When this is live for the people, once again, this is not live, and I know there are probably so many of you. I can see it now. If I'm just noticing our creatures of habit, Eddie just said, "Good evening, fellas." Derek said, "What's up?" Kenneth said something about me being wrong. Like I'm just imagining all the things that are in the comments right now. But we are not here in Nashville right now. Stoney, you are about to embark when we are recording this. You're about to embark on vacation. Where is that to, my friend?
Yeah, I'm heading up to New Jersey. My father-in-law plays a tribute show to Bob Dylan it's around every Memorial Day because Bob Dylan's birthday was somewhere around this time of year. So every year for the last, my wife and I will have been together for 14 years come August. And every year we make this trip to go see his show, visit with family, maybe get some beach time in. I hear we may be even going off to the mountains in Pennsylvania at some point this trip. Always nice to kind of catch my breath a little bit, rewind and recalibrate before. Man, I've got my nobody. Summer scouting is going to start here pretty shortly.
Yeah, that's exciting, and it's quite funny because I too will also be out of town this weekend and into next week, and I will be in Philadelphia for a wedding, so I'll be in Pennsylvania, and then I will be going to the beach, the Jersey Shore, and then to New York for a couple days over Memorial Day weekend. So
nice.
There's going to be the opportunity that we just randomly pass each other, and we don't know it. Maybe we see each other at a glance, and it'll be quite interesting. Maybe if we get enough people, they will demand the Hot Read Podcast New Jersey edition live. Well, if we somehow we're somewhere together.
Well, I can tell you if you hang out in Red Bank, there's probably a pretty good chance you're going to see me crawling through the streets in the middle of the night at some point this week.
I love it. And so today's episode, as always, is presented by our sponsor, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers, with locations all over the greater Nashville area: Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose 8th Avenue, Sylvan Park, and coming soon to Inglewood in East Nashville, along with Sinkers Beverages. More on them later in a second. But this episode is a Q&A episode that we gathered some questions from all of you earlier in the week, banked some of those, and then said, hey, with the media availability that we had with Brian Callahan and some players on Tuesday, I thought, we can make a show out of that while Stoney is gone. But since both of us would be gone on Friday, might as well just save those for a rainy day. And that day is today. I don't know if it's raining in Nashville or not. Who knows? But that's what we're going to do today. We're just going to do a nice, short, sweet, simple little Q&A here before we get out of here and let all of you guys enjoy your Memorial Day weekend like we are. And then, of course, we're back next week because OTAs start and then rookie minicamp before we go into the great darkness of the offseason. So don't want to think about that. We don't want to think about that right now. Still want to think about some football. So without further ado, we can get into our Q&A here. And the first question comes by way of at Two Tone Blue Blood, who says, would love to know your opinions on Callahan going into year 2. How much of last year's issues were coaching related versus talent/roster related? And I think this is a really interesting one because if I can recall earlier this week, Greg Rosenthal had a podcast where he and JP Acosta, who is a more so draft NFL as a whole, analyst, writer for, I believe, Sports Illustrated, did a ranking, or more so a draft of, they drafted the coaches they would most want. And, of course, at the top, it was, Andy Reid, Sean McVay, all of those cats. And then you had
usual suspects,
Mike Tomlin and Mike Vrabel in the middle there somewhere, kind of debatable on how much you put into those stocks given where they are right now in their coaching careers. And then all the way at the bottom was at 30 or 28, because they didn't count first-time head coaches this year. All the way at the bottom, they had Brian Callahan as their last grad, the kid that was picked last in the class here, which I get, right? You're coming off your first season as a head coach. You're coming off being the worst team in the NFL. There sure were a lot of mistakes. You also look at not just from the results on the field, but from an outside perspective. I can remember the toughness debate and the scandal that we had where somebody called the players soft and called Brian Callahan soft and whatnot. That was a whole fiasco, as well as Brian Callahan crying after the victory over the Patriots and things like that. All of that goes into what Brian Callahan was in year one. And like the question is, what are our opinions of Brian Callahan going into year two? And Stoney, maybe I'll let you start. I look at that list and I think that's a great way to jump off of this point. Like, do I think there are coaches I would take Brian Callahan over right now in the NFL? I think there's a few, right? But nowhere near, like, I think at the top. Like, I think you put him in that same vein of a Dave Canales. I would say, who's the coach in Atlanta? I forget his name. It's
Raheem Morris.
Raheem Morris. I'd put him in that same kind of category there as well. Like, those guys, all of these guys who are year one coaches last year, some of them didn't have the best seasons. Dave Canales, the Panthers, didn't have the best season by any metrics, but did find some promise with their quarterback Bryce Young. Raheem Morris, there's kind of sifting through their quarterback situation, just like Brian Callahan was. Brian Daboll is also, I think, down there as well. Yeah. It's hard to remember the good times of Brian Daboll with the Buffalo Bills, and now look at what he has done there in New York. Like, all of these guys, right? I think each of them have a little bit of a different flavor, but all of those guys, I think, are deserving to be in the mix of that bottom half. And I think I would take Brian Callahan over a couple of those, right? I do think that he is, when it comes to locker room presence, really, really solid. I think he knows how to get his team right and his team together. But, I think some of the things on the field are still missing. And those are things, when we get to the second part of the question, how much does that factor from last year to this year, or maybe just the circumstances for him? He was put in a bad position. To me, I'm still high on him, right? Maybe that is a hot take because of the results, but like, what if you're just now joining the Hot Read podcast after you were with us through draft season, maybe found us toward the end of the season? What did we say the entire last back half of the season, right? Like, if you watch the tape, it felt like we kept saying, like, it's there if it's getting there, right? We're so close to this thing clicking. And so I would like to think that with under year two with Brian Callahan here, and with a quarterback that he maybe feels a lot more comfortable with, and it's a guy that he picked, with this offensive staff, I think I feel the same amount of confidence as I did in him last year.
Yeah, and it's funny, JT, how all of the good teams have really good coaches, but all of the bad teams, the coaches get fired. I mean, it's such a it's a soup. It is multiple ingredients boiling together for hours to produce winning success in the NFL. And so to isolate what the head coach does to a point where you're ranking them 1 through 27, man, I don't want to say anything about anybody that's putting out lists at this time of year, but I'm going to say it would take quite a bit of work. I know how much work that I put in to reach a conclusion, form an opinion on Brian Callahan myself. To do that for 28 other teams, oh, buddy, that's a lot of work. I'm not going to assume anything. I'm just saying. I think it's hard to really, for us on the outside looking in, to really evaluate a head coach's performance. I like Brian Callahan. I'm with you. We talked about it all season long. You can almost, I'd be willing to bet, I think it was the episode right after the Dolphins game where they really struggled to get to 1-3 out of the gate. And they got that first win against the Dolphins, but it wasn't really that pretty. I didn't feel like they won that game how they want to play football, so to speak. Memory's a little foggy, but I remember us being like, yeah, they won, they dominated, but the circumstances were not ideal. I think at that moment is when I kind of realized this roster is just bad. And it is going to take a get ready to drink player acquisition cycle for the roster to improve, to give Brian Callahan something to work with. Because I don't care who you are, if your roster is the worst in the league, and I think at the end of the 2024 season, I think you had the Titans, you had the Patriots, you had the Raiders. Those three, any of those three teams could have made a compelling argument for having the worst roster in the entire NFL. Coincidentally, look how those seasons went for those teams. So are there things that Brian Callahan needs to improve upon? Yes, absolutely. But I tend to think, man, the tape shows a scheme that can work. You hear good things coming out of the locker room about his presence and his relationship with the team. He has acknowledged this offseason areas where he needs to improve, but I think the surface level of does this guy know offense? Can he design an offense to suit the strengths of Cam Ward? I personally trust him to do that. I think this is an experienced guy that can draw from a wealth of knowledge from all of his years, all of the different people, players, coaches alike that he's worked with in the NFL. And I think if there's elevated play at quarterback along the offensive line, the defense stays healthy, I think all of a sudden there's potential for this switch to flip. And suddenly the perception of Brian Callahan is different. We can get into the criticisms a little deeper, but on the surface, yeah, I like Brian Callahan. I want him. I want him to succeed this year, and for this franchise to stay patient with everybody at the top of this organization to see this vision through.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Now, here's a question that just stemmed not from any of these, but just talking about this, right? It is a big, no doubt that even more so than Cam's first year, this is Brian Callahan's put up or shut up year, right? We talk about that player acquisition cycle. It is all but finished, basically, save for maybe a surprise post June 1st cut signing that I don't think is exactly coming down the pipe, but you never know, right? Those are hard to predict. I look at the roster after this acquisition cycle and those criticisms, right, that we had with Brian Callahan from a play calling perspective, from maybe a time management perspective, maybe, even himself, the self-scouted criticism of I need to be more involved with the defensive side of the ball after last year, right? How quickly do you think those things need to look like they've improved for you to still have that confidence? Because it's not like even after this player acquisition cycle, we've said it 3 times now, it is a hot read happy hour. I hope you all are drinking at home.
Hit up Sinkers Beverages, baby.
Hit up Sinkers Beverages. You look at the roster.
Yeah.
Can you really say it's fully improved?
No.
The places that you still have had question marks at the end of the season, you still have going into the season. The edge is still a huge question mark. I'd offer that at this point in time, the wide receiver room is worse because there's just simply not because the talent, the ceiling is definitely there, but the veteran presence, the guys who have done this before right now, you have 3 of them on the roster, 2 of them who have actually ever done anything in the league. And 2 of the 3 that are now on this roster are with the team for the first time. You don't have an NWI. You don't have a DeAndre Hopkins to start the year, those types of things. You're betting on the upside of your young wide receivers who are rookies, and rookies make mistakes and are new to this whole thing, right? So like, I get, like, obviously I think that maybe like towards the middle of the season, this is going to be a way better wide receiving core. But like at this point in time, like I don't think there's any argument to be made that this is a better wide receiving core than years past, or specifically last year. I'd say the one area where they have really improved is the offensive line. Yeah, which I think is the one place you can give this team its flowers. They went ahead and massively upgraded the offensive line, and I think it shot them from being somewhere between 18 and 25th in the league in offensive line to maybe a top 10 unit if you're that high on what everybody but Dan Moore Jr. can do. So like, yeah. Those are things I think with Brian Callahan, for me to stay confident in him, I need to see those things maybe from the sidelines that we had criticisms of before the results really sway my confidence in him.
Well, it's part of the job, JT. I mean, not every situation in the NFL is going to be perfect. Not every head coach is going to have the Philadelphia Eagles roster or the Kansas City Chiefs roster or anything like that. There are going to be instances where, we can't just, by the same token, like give Brian Callahan a complete pass and just say, well, the roster's bad, because if you're waiting for the roster to get really good, it's going to be like 3 more years at the earliest before there's depth and every hole is plugged, so to speak. So I do think, to your point, there is an element of, okay, we made critical components of the offense better this offseason. Now we need to see you do a little bit of work. We should get a cleaner evaluation of Brian as an offensive mind because of, like you said, the offensive line upgrades. I do think Dan Moore Jr., when you just look at the best 5, so to speak, Dan Moore Jr. is absolutely one of the best 5 offensive linemen on the Titans roster if he's on this roster last year. So it is an improvement. Moving J.C. Latham to the right side is an improvement at right tackle. Kevin Zeitler at right guard is an improvement there. Getting Lloyd Cushenberry back and healthy is an improvement at center. When the protection is good, the rest of the offense kind of spirals out of that. So there is an exponential impact when you get your offensive line right, and we see it with the teams that are consistently making deep runs in the playoffs. They're good in the trenches, good offensive lines, good defensive lines, that sort of thing. So to me, that is one of the top priorities and one of the things that should alleviate this liability that the offensive line was last year, where it clouded the evaluation of Will Levis and the offense as a whole, clouded the evaluation of Brian Callahan as a play caller, because he was, to borrow a phrase from our buddy Zach Lyons, he was calling plays with 2 hands tied behind his back last season. So you improve the offensive line, theoretically, your offense should flow a little bit easier. The second component of that is the quarterback position, or the second crucial component I mentioned earlier is the quarterback. Will Levis wasn't really cutting it last year. Now they go and get Cam Ward, and albeit there will be a rookie learning curve, I'm sure it's not just going to be storming out the gate, 50 points a game, that sort of deal. But even with what they have, I personally do think it will be an improvement over Will Levis. And if those 2 things are better, it should make the offense go a little better. It might give us a glimpse into like who Brian Callahan is as a play caller, as an offensive mind, when the conditions are adequate. Because last year not only were they inadequate, they were disastrous. And so to your point, I do think big picture wise, when you talk about like competing for Super Bowls, this roster is still going to be, I'm telling Titans fans this summer, like, be prepared to be celebrating 6 or 7 wins by the end of the season. It's going to be a while. It's going to take a couple more cycles before they have filled every hole. But at the very least, the offense at a bare minimum, basement level, should be a little bit cleaner, a little bit more efficient, and it should give us a clear picture to evaluate the head coach.
Yeah, I mean, is the ultimate win just getting that point scored per game average above 17 finally? Like, can we please do that? No, I agree with a lot of that. I do also think it's funny you talk about the good teams have good coaches and the bad teams fire theirs, which is really funny. It reminded me that Nick Sirianni got paid a bag this week on a contract extension. I can't remember who tweeted this out afterwards, but it was something along the lines of the Eagles have been to 2 Super Bowls in the last 3 years, and I still can't figure out if Nick Sirianni is a good coach or not. Like there's so many more factors that go into the team building and the staff building that matter, right? Like,
absolutely.
I think there's a lot of coaches qualified that if you swap them out with Nick Sirianni, like, you could probably still have the same type of success with that roster. But I think that's a good segue into our next question that comes from the general at Mac9NJ, in which he said, with all of the quarterback turnovers last year, are you guys worried that Callahan will have the reins too tight on Ward? Kind of goes back to what you were just talking about, how he handled Will Levis in type of those situations. Do we think that, obviously, there are concerns about the way Cam Ward kind of plays, but are you concerned at all that Callahan might keep the reins too tight on a guy who needs to play out of structure?
I'll phrase it like this. I am not worried that Brian Callahan will rein in Cam Ward's aggressive style, but I am worried that Cam Ward will still play a turnover-worthy style of offense early on. From everything I've seen, and if you guys haven't watched the install live with Greg Cosell and Brian Callahan breaking down some Cam Ward tape, you can see his mannerisms. Like, he kind of lights up when you start talking about Cam Ward. And one of the things that he said at several different points this offseason so far is that you don't want to take away what makes a quarterback special. And so I think that is the approach with Cam Ward. I think he may make mistakes, but I don't think they're going to be afraid to really let him go out there and do his thing. Now, a more measured, calculated approach early on in the season, yeah, sure. I mean, we talked about what the Washington Commanders did with Jaden Daniels early on. They ran the ball. A lot of his throws in those first couple of weeks were like outside of the numbers, quick throws, short throws, that sort of thing, to kind of get him into a rhythm, get him acclimated to the feel of the NFL. It doesn't mean that he's going to come out slinging the ball all over the yard the first couple of weeks of the season. But I think by midseason, late in the season, I think we're going to see a guy that is a little more loose, a little more free to create and freelance on his own, because that is one of the strengths of his game. And I get the feeling that Brian kind of trusts him to just let Cam Ward be Cam Ward. So that would be my expectation. I think there were some limitations with Will Levis that I don't think that the trust was quite there, but it sounds like the trust is there with Cam Ward. So we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to bring up the same thing, right? You don't want to take away what makes a player great. And I think if you're following that philosophy, it'd be really hard to put the reins on Cam Ward. Like, he would have to have like 8 interceptions in his first like 3 games for me to say, okay, maybe we need to get this guy back to basics, right? Like, I think that's what the whole offseason process is, right? Training camp, preseason games. That's where you really, get, even at this point, right, kind of melding those two offenses together, the Miami and what Brian Callahan wants to run. That's your reining in of Cam Ward, right? And then once you're sure that he is in the confines of what your offense wants, what you want that offense to be, you kind of have to take your hands off with a guy like Cam. Same way that the Chiefs really take their hands off with Patrick Mahomes. And you see some of those plays that would never work for anybody else, but because it's Patrick Mahomes and he's shovel passing and making these ridiculous types of plays out of structure, like, those are the things you can't predict, right? And you have to trust that this guy knows how to play within our system, but he's going to do things that we hope are just so miraculous and incredible that we live with them and we live with the consequences of them sometimes, right? And I think that's what it is. Like I said, it'd have to be a monstrous meltdown of over the first like 3 games of the season for me to really like say this needs to go back to basics and we need to figure something out quick. But you know, anything can happen still. But I think that when you think about what the parameters are of kind of coaching and head over the shoulder of Cam Ward, there's nothing like limiting a playbook for him, right? Like I think that would just be malpractice when you consider taking this guy first overall and everything that you've put into him. A couple more questions here. We appreciate you guys sticking with us. If you are, we do not know. We don't know Philadelphia and New Jersey respectively here. But if you guys are having a conversation in the chat, have fun. I hope you guys
knock
are
yourselves
having a
out.
good time. Yeah. Before we continue here, have to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers, 7 locations across the greater Nashville area. Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and coming soon to Inglewood near East Nashville. Simply the best selection of beer and burgers, over 25 on tap. Craft burgers that are better than any other establishment in the city. They are so good, along with their appetizers and other foods like the Nashville hot cheese curds, the pretzel bites, all of those good things. You simply cannot beat it, whether you're going out for a trivia night at one of their locations or just for a date night or before a Nashville soccer game or any of the above. You cannot go wrong with ML Rose. Find the location nearest you at mlrose.com. Also presented by Sinkers Beverages, a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, and for good reason, because they simply have the best selection of beer, wine, and spirits in the city. It's incredible if you ever get the chance to go over there. I mean, they have 2 rows of THC drinks or CBD drinks, whatever those are called. That's how wide their selection is. When you go over there, you got to make sure you sign up for the in-crowd for special benefits, allocations, and tastings that you can only be a part of if you sign up for the in-crowd. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show, and thank you to ML Rose for being our presenting sponsor. Okay, Stoney. Next question here comes from Eddie. Good friend Eddie. Shout out Eddie, fellow very I would say veteran listener of the Hot Read podcast who says 6 or 7 receivers this year, and who do you think probably ends up on the roster? And I think this is a really interesting question because last year's conversation was there are so many so many wide receivers on this roster that could make the cut because, there wasn't a lot that stood up above the rest. That we had to kind of go back to what Brian Callahan and the Cincinnati Bengals did in his tenure there. And ultimately we came to the conclusion that there were 6 receivers most of the time on the Bengals roster. It ended up being 6 for the Titans. So it was fair to say that they followed the same philosophy that Brian Callahan had in Cincinnati. However, it's a lot different this year. And I think that there is a case to be made for 7 because obviously you have Van Jefferson, Tyler Lockett, Calvin Ridley, Alec Ayumanner, Chimere Dike, and, some one of the others being Treylon Burks, Jaquan Jackson, Colton Dowell, Bryce Oliver, Xavier Restrepo, TJ Sheffield. Like, someone else is going to make that 6. However, I would say that, out of all those guys, the receiver with the best chance to make the roster right now is Bryce Oliver out of that group, just from what he did last year. He was a key contributor to this team down the stretch. He made some plays. He wasn't the most prevalent on the offense, but was dependable, especially on special teams, which this 6th guy is going to have to be. He was one of the reasons that the Titans special teams unit made the change they did and became a semi-decent unit because of him playing gunner. So right now I think he's in that leading position. And so if you had to ask me for my money, and this isn't new on this show, which we've learned, obviously, that my 6 as of right now are Calvin Ridley, Tyler Lockett, I think you have to keep a third veteran presence, whether it will be Van Jefferson or someone else. Otherwise, there is still a Keenan Allen. There is still an Amari Cooper. There are still veterans out there who have not signed that you could look at and say, Van Jefferson's not doing it for us. There's another guy out here who could fill that need. Alec Ayumanner and Chimere Dike, I think, are two guys that definitely make the roster as of now. So that's 5. And then if you had to ask me, he brings the special teams presence. He works as the X or Z type role. And I think Bryce Oliver deserves a spot on the team as of right now, which is your 6, which brings in the discussion. 7 receivers. And obviously the one that we think that everyone continues to want to talk about is Xavier Restrepo.
Yeah, we know how this question's coded. We know what we're really asking.
We know what we're really asking, which is Xavier Restrepo worth rostering? And to me, I think it really is going to come. First of all, Stoney, 6 or 7 for you. Like I'll leave it to you before I get on my diatribe here. But like, and do you have the same 6 as me? First of all, or do you have a different 6? Or do you think is Xavier Restrepo worth having as the 7th?
We have the same 6 for the same exact reason. I think Bryce Oliver showed a lot of promise down the stretch on offense, and he developed into a pretty nice gunner on special teams as well. Adds value there. So I think that is something that's going to get him a roster spot. I think the conversation around keeping 6 or 7 wide receivers, to me, it gets a little misguided sometimes when we talk about it as like Xavier Restrepo versus Mason Kinsey versus TJ Sheffield. It depends on how the roster math shakes out, because this is a team that could use some depth at cornerback. So use some depth at
linebacker. Yep. I was about to say. Yep.
Yeah. So you're talking about like wide receiver 7 versus linebacker 5 or cornerback 6 or something like that. And I think when you look at making that decision, it still kind of comes down to who can do the most for you. And I still feel like Restrepo's ceiling with this team is as a slot receiver. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think it's something that they need badly enough where they're going to have to keep multiple guys, because we've also talked about like the versatility of guys like Tyler Lockett, Van Jefferson, Chimere Dike, even Bryce Oliver that could probably slide in and play the slot if you needed them to.
Yep.
So that versatility helps them. When you have Restrepo, he's not a guy that can kick outside and take on one-on-one press man coverage. And he's also not a guy that you're going to line up on special teams. So I see a difficult path for him making the roster. And I don't think there are many guys that they do have that are exceptional enough at multiple things to outweigh the linebacker, the cornerback that they might need for special teams as well. So I might be tempted to stick with 6. And it's really going to depend to me on what needs to happen at returner. So if they need a guy that isn't one of those 6 or isn't a safety or defensive back or something to return kicks and punts, then maybe they're inclined to keep the 7th wide receiver. But I'm kind of leaning 6 right now because I don't know. Historically, they've gone with 6. I don't know if there's a 7th guy to me that I look at and say that dude is going to command a roster spot.
Yeah, right. I think that is exactly how I'd frame it as well, right? The 7th wide receiver would come down to, first of all, this guy would have to outwork everybody else on this roster to be worthy of that 7th spot, which is what Xavier Restrepo is already going to have to do, right? He's going to start out with the 2s and 3s. He's going to start out catching balls from Will Levis, Tim Boyle, and Brandon Allen. If he can elevate himself to start getting more of that upper 2 level where they mix in with Cam again, that's where your conversation is the connection between Cam Ward and Restrepo worth keeping that 7th receiver. And I wrote last week about Xavier Restrepo and what that connection really means, right? It's not something that we see very often, although we've seen it very recently a lot. And it's something that when you talk about it, like, oh, we need to keep him on the roster because of this connection with Cam. What does that exactly mean, right? And so I took a deep dive into what exactly Xavier Restrepo's realistic results could look like in 2025. And you look at some of the guys who have reunited in the NFL, right? Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. I know Cam was the number one pick, just like Joe Burrow, but certainly not the same level of caliber of player coming out as they were, right? Jamar Chase, infinitely better wide receiver than Xavier Restrepo. I think that's fair to say. Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith also combined. Chase and Burrow at LSU combined for over 2,000 yards, 23 touchdowns. And over the last 4 years have connected for over 5,000 yards, right? So that has paid dividends, although I would argue that both those guys would be doing what they do with whatever team that they ended up with. Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith, both top 50 picks or just outside the 50th pick. Hurts, second rounder, 53rd overall. Devonta Smith, top 10 pick in 20 and 21. They didn't play much together at Alabama, just 125 yards and a touchdown. However, over 4 seasons, 4,300 yards. That connection has continued to work very well. Go back to when Devontae Adams went to Las Vegas with Derek Carr. That duo back in 2012 and 2013 put up 3,000 yards, 39 touchdowns. When he came to the Raiders, he put up 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns, something that he was at the back end with Rodgers not really doing, right? And so that connection kind of revitalized that. And when Derek Carr left, you saw Devontae Adams essentially won out. So that connection absolutely mattered in Las Vegas.
Sure.
You look at some of the other ones, Kyler Murray, Marquise Brown, put up 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns in their college career together. More or less not great, but that had to do with injuries. Put up just over 600 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 60 receptions, but did not play a lot of games. They played 13 games over 2 seasons combined. So that's one that's tough. And then, of course, Tua and Jalen Waddle, right? Yet again, all these guys that we're talking about, top first or second round picks, most of them being top 10 picks. Certainly not what Xavier Restrepo is. Certainly what we don't know what Cam Ward is yet, right? And so Tua and Waddle, 700 plus yards, 7 touchdowns in their 4-year career together, over 3,300 yards, but 3,300 of Waddle's 4,200 total yards. So about 1,000 yards in there from Skylar Thompsons of the world and things like that. And so I don't think that connection really matters for Xavier Restrepo and Cam Ward, really, right? It's certainly not enough to make it the reason you're keeping this guy as a 7th receiver, right? He has to provide something else, because if you're keeping him just for that connection, there's a very similar connection or duo from college that reunited just last year in Bo Nix and Troy Franklin. I mean, the two put up very similar numbers to what Cam Ward and Xavier Restrepo put up in college. Bo Nix and Franklin had 81 receptions on 114 targets for 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns in college. You got to the NFL last year. Troy Franklin had 30 receptions on 52 targets, 300 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And I think that's the ceiling of what Xavier Restrepo's production could be at the NFL level if he were to. So that all of this to say, right? Because once again, Troy Franklin also was drafted in the 4th round. Certainly not Xavier Restrepo, UDFA. And so I'm not saying it's impossible that he makes the roster, right? He's going to have to put in a lot of work. But that work's going to have to come on special teams. He's going to have to do something other than play the slot position worthy of being slot 2 on this team, right? He's going to have to contribute somewhere else, because if you're looking at the realistic production of these type of connections, you're looking at Troy Franklin's 300 yards and maybe 2 to 3 touchdowns. Is that worth keeping over linebacker 5 or cornerback 5? I don't know.
Who might need to come in and see real meaningful action this season as well.
And so it's a tough conversation. And I think ultimately they do keep 6, although it's going to be a fun story to watch. And I know fans are going to really like it and enjoy it all off season, rooting for him. I will be rooting for him too. People think I hate him. I just am trying to set reasonable expectations for the prospect, right? he's going to have to show something else. And I think if he's able to play on special teams, which even that I think is a challenge, because you look directly at the reasons why he wasn't drafted is that he's slow. You need your wide receivers who are gunners and punt returners to be a little faster, I think. So it's going to be an uphill battle for him. And so I think I'm with you right now as well. I think I'm keeping 6 at this time.
Lest we forget, try as they may, this organization simply cannot kill Mason Kinsey.
Yeah.
That's and Mason Kinsey can get back there and return. So there's
also, I think there's also a world where, based on his special teams merit alone, this kid out of UConn, TJ Sheffield
People
also
like
has
him.
just as good of a chance to be a special teamer on this team and make the roster as Xavier Restrepo does right now, in my opinion. And I know that people don't want to hear that because it doesn't fit the narrative and the feel-good story of Cam wanting his guy. But, like, Cam got him in the door. It stops there, right? Yeah. At least in my opinion.
Yeah, and they also have
Jaquan Jackson, Colton Dowell, Traylon Burks. Like,
it's a crowded room.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the defensive backs right now. They have 18 corners and safeties on the roster right now. Some competition on the back end of that roster, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
8 linebackers too.
Those are the guys who will be fighting for that last 7 to 8 spots. I guarantee you that's what we're going to be talking about in late July and August. Next question here. Eddie, once again, has 2 more, and then we'll get out of here today. His next question, speaking of the roster here, Stoney, while you have it up, you might as well keep that up. Because his next question is, what is your guys' prediction for a surprise roster cut?
Ooh.
And so I know this puts you on the spot, and it puts me on the spot too, because I look at a lot of this roster, and it feels like a lot of this roster doesn't lead into surprise roster. Like simply the best one that I could come up with, right? Like, unless the surprise roster cut is L'Jarius Sneed because of this something crazy that happens in his case or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, the best one I could come up with is Joey Sly. Like the kicker that they signed, right? Like, he just doesn't cut it, and they have to go they welcome back Nick Folk or something. Because I look at the rest of this roster, at least starting roster, right? Like, as of right now, there's nobody backing up a lot of these starters that I would be surprised doesn't make the roster, right? Like, at least on defense, like, maybe I'd be surprised if Jalen Harrell gets cut. Like,
that's a good one.
But, like, outside of that, Keandre Coburn, Cedric Gray, James Williams, like, all these linebackers, there's a lot of competition. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they just find better options.
I thought about this the other day, actually. Not this specific question, but this player. Nobody seems to be talking about James Williams. And it kind of makes me wonder, because he entered the league as this sort of linebacker safety hybrid. Special teams guy, no doubt about that. I thought he was pretty solid from what I watched on special teams, but there is like no mention of him even remotely anywhere near this other starting linebacker spot next to Cody Barton. What we've heard is like Otis Reese played well down the stretch. We've heard Cedric Gray is going to get an opportunity here. I don't know if this is just like us, the collective media, have forgotten about James Williams, so we haven't talked about him, or if it really is a reflection of an attitude in the building where maybe this guy just doesn't quite fit what we want to do here. I think it would really surprise people if he was cut, but based on that little voice in the back of my head saying, why isn't he being talked about? And maybe it's just like, because Stoney, he's like linebacker 5 on this team right now. Nobody's talking about the 5th linebacker. You sicko, stop looking at the Titans roster. Maybe that's all it is. But I legit thought about this the other day. It was like, I wonder if they're going to end up cutting James Williams. That would be a surprise, certainly, I think. But I could realistically see it happening as well. Similar to, like you said, with Jalen Harrell. Like, these are, I guess, technically we're going to put them in a bucket as Rand Carthon players. Yeah. And maybe they don't fit what they're trying to do here. So it's time to move on. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to surprise anybody. Traylon Burks, we throw that name out there.
I think that's pretty given. I think if it happened, it'd be an injury designation, though, which would give it a little bit more clarity, right? Because I think as of right now, it's going to be hard pressed for him to be ready for the season, like let alone training camp, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised about that one. The other two I'll say on the offensive side of the ball, though, real quick. Josh Wiley, Gunnar Helm's knocking on the door, and like, why keep Josh Wiley and Gunnar Helm when you can keep Gunnar Helm and then DMR or Odakoya, right? Like if you want to only keep 3 tight ends, or once again, we forgot about a wide receiver on this team to add to that room, right? James Prochet, as the guy who is special teamer. So I think out of the wide receivers here as well, like I get maybe I'll feed the fan fire a little bit and say that like I could see a world where Van Jefferson's cut. Like I wouldn't agree with it because like if you're gonna cut Van Jefferson to keep another young player, I get it. I think it's not great practice to only have 2 receivers who have played more than like 5 games in their careers on your team. So like I don't really agree with it, but I could see it, right? Like those are 2 as well on the offensive side that I would see as maybe surprise cuts. Yeah.
I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I was just looking over the linebacker group, and again, to support this crazy conspiracy theory I have going now, they're turning the back end of that room. They bring in Curtis Jacobs, Anthony Orji, David Benda as an undrafted free agent.
Him a lot. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, those aren't just I wouldn't be just sneezing at those dudes or laughing at those dudes, whatever the phrase is. I can't remember. I'm on vacation brain. It's already here.
No worries, because we have one more. Yeah, I think those are really solid ones that I think they're not set in stone, right? Like there are questions about them, which leads us to our final question here, which will entertain your vacation brain. Eddie, his final question here says, gorilla in a bear cage match, who wins?
The gorilla. I'm going with the gorilla just because of the strength, the power. I know bears are a lot more vicious than I think people think and give them credit for, but I mean, the gorilla to me.
Are you like in every simulation, black bear, brown bear, polar bear? You going with the gorilla in all of them?
Well, I don't know, because polar bears are apparently like sociopaths. So maybe the polar bear makes it, but I think I'm going gorilla over just about anything in the animal kingdom, as a matter of fact.
I think that's fair. I think I like the bear. I think the bear's a good underdog story after all this talk about gorillas versus men. We got to give the underdog. He deserves his time in the limelight here. So I'm going to go
fair enough.
But that is going to do it for our Q&A today. Did not think we would go this long, but once again, we start talking and you can't stop us. So appreciate you guys being here with us today. Sorry we were not live. I know you guys
don't yell at us,
really, I know you guys really like when we are live, and we tried to be as transparent as possible this time, but don't worry. We probably will be taking next Tuesday off because we still will be both of us will still be traveling, but we will be back next Friday to talk about the first media availability of OTAs. We'll get to react to a lot of those things, what goes down at OTAs when we finally get to see the rookies mix in with some of the veterans who will be there at OTAs, and so much more. We appreciate you guys all being here today. Thank you to ML Rose and Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. And until next week, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you then. Have a happy Memorial Day weekend.